All right, what's the best
Cool.
thing you saw?
So I will give it to Peacemaker season 2, episode 1, just because I haven't watched much else since then. And if you haven't checked out Peacemaker, he was originally in the Suicide Squad, done by James Gunn. Great character in that. And then surprisingly, probably one of the best comic book TV shows out there. It will in season 1. I thought they really, added a lot of depth and really fleshed out his character quite in there. And John Cena just gave an all-round great performance for Peacemaker to a point where he's showing up in Superman movies, in cameos and stuff like that, and he's becoming more and more recognizable. But I watched first episode of season 2, and I think it picks back up from where it left off in season 1. I think quite interesting, especially now that they've shifted it to the DCU, and how they've incorporated it into that particular universe, and how they've retconned a few things. It's an interesting story, and it seems that it's going to go in some interesting places, and it's going to get a little bit wacky and a little bit weird with all the different travels between dimensions and portal travel and stuff like that. So one that I'm kind of keen to see how it develops across season 2, and how I think this was dubbed as playing a significant role in shaping the DCU, this particular series. So quite interesting to see how it does that, and how it does it compared to what the Marvel shows did for the MCU.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those weird hybrids, right? Where it's one of the few things that's carrying over from the old TCU, right? Does that get awkward at all, or does it feel like a fit?
I think for sure the season 1, whilst it was set in the DCEU, most of the tie-ins were just like references and stuff like that. And obviously, you had that big scene at the end of season 1 where the Justice League show up and they make a few jokes, but they quite easily retcon that and take out the Justice League and plug in Superman, Supergirl, and the Justice Gang into that scene and just completely retcon it 100%. So I think on that element it's fine. I think one thing that was actually quite interesting was, again, having seen Superman and how wholesome he is just how crazy they get in this particular in this particular show in episode 1, where you have a full blown orgy happening in episode 1, and it's quite graphic in going on. And I think I support it in the sense that it's kind of showing how James Gunn envisions his world, where there's different pockets and there's different stuff happening across the universe, and not everything has to be one tone, not everything has to be of a formula. And I think it gives people a lot more, or it gives directors and writers a lot more creative freedom and a lot more flexibility in the stories that they're able to tell, and how they're able to bring certain characters to life, because they're able to just be a little bit more free. So seeing that, I was a bit shocked, but I was like, I'm happy to see it, because we're not playing within the books, and we can push the boundaries in what we're trying to do, and not everything's going to be the same.
I'll reserve judgment on the DCU for a while, see how it plays out. But it does seem like it's not as streamlined as the MCU was. That's probably a good thing.
Something which I've seen recently, which I think a lot of people should watch, is called Chief of War. It's starring Jason Momoa. It's pretty much about the indigenous people in the Hawaii Islands way back in the day, and like there's war within pretty much their islands. And I think what's gonna happen also, it seems like I'm on episode 3, it seems like the colonizers are gonna make their way through. So it seems like a storyline which obviously war within war within their people, within their community, as well as um a soon to be coming threat from the colonizers, which they'll soon be colonized. Because at the end of episode 3, it's pretty much something where I was like, okay, yeah, definitely, I'm sure the colonizers are coming soon. Because we already see, like, you will see the colonizers like episode 1 or maybe even 2, I believe, from what I can remember. But like the threat isn't imminent. However, at the end of episode 3, you're like, okay, you see where it's going. So overall, I think it is a really, really good one. It's a really, really good one. You see a lot of butt cheeks though, which is, is a bit strange. But it's not strange. Obviously, that's how they were living back in the day. So yeah, but that's just a warning. That's a warning. But besides that, it's a really good one. I would definitely recommend that. Apple, you're doing your thing.
So, like, but it's like the main story focuses on the internal politics of Hawaii, with kind of
I'd
like
say
the
both. I'd say definitely that's definitely one. I'd say like there's like two storylines, as in that's definitely one, and the other one is just pretty much is just to save them from the threat of colonization.
Okay, I see. Sounds interesting. I watched Waiting for the Barbarians, which is a 2019 alternative history movie, essentially. So the idea is essentially it's in a fictional world, and there's an empire that kind of resembles the French Empire, and it's kind of got an outpost in some kind of desert country that looks a little bit like North Africa. But like the context is completely fictional. The story follows kind of the governor of this outpost, who kind of exists on the edges of this empire, and he kind of runs the place in a fairly casual way where nothing ever really happens. And there's this like this local woman who is attacked by soldiers, and he kind of takes her in, helps her recover, and he brings her back to her people. And that sets off a sequence of events where his superiors back in the capital kind of get wind of this, and they start punishing him for it, leading to a point where he's been removed from his office. And that happens in the context of this empire kind of running a campaign where they try to extend their control of this area. They kind of completely underestimate the resilience and the response from the locals, and they kind of get defeated and kind of have to retreat. And there's kind of like two plots. The first plot is kind of the fate of this governor, who basically is this completely naive guy who gets caught up in kind of the political machinations of this empire and is essentially being punished for being a halfway decent person. And then you've got the political angle, which is this empire that basically tries to pick a fight that they can't win, but they do so out of arrogance and overconfidence, and that then has kind of a ripple effects. It's kind of hard to summarize because it's kind of two very different plot lines, but they kind of are kind of like an overall allegory for kind of imperialism and how a country can be militarily powerful but still fail to actually be in control of the things they think they're in control over, and how that can have a backlash that does a lot more damage to them that they basically invited. It's kind of the overall summary. What's interesting about this movie is it stars Johnny Depp and Robert Pattinson, and nobody has heard of this movie. It's made less than $1 million at the box office, and I kind of found it on a streamer randomly. It looked kind of interesting, and it's not an amazing movie, but it's a good movie, and it's certainly well made, and it certainly tells exactly the story it kind of wants to tell, and it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So one of the things that I personally didn't like very much is that this governor is kind of a very naive person who behaves in ways that are kind of not very believable. But the entire thing is caught up in this big allegory for this is kind of like how an empire can kind of choke on its own arrogance, essentially. And so it does what it does and does it pretty well, but it's also got some serious flaws, but it's also a lot better than its box office success would suggest. And for some reason, it came out with fairly big name actors and nobody cared. It is worth at least looking at if that sounds interesting to you. And that's why it's my recommendation of the week.
So a couple of weeks back, me and Daniel had a discussion about Frasier, which is, one of those like legacy series that was brought back, renewed for more seasons. And in that review, I talked about Dexter Resurrection that had just come out. So I didn't watch Frasier, but I was like, I'm a little bit concerned about Dexter. They brought it back. I had really fun memories watching that through uni. I was like, you know what? Because you said Frasier was good, I was like, let me take the leap of faith. And pleasantly surprised. Like, this is a very, very, very solid season of Dexter. Now, again, it's not anything amazing. It's not like the best story or like the most well-acted thing, but it just brings back some of the feels of, I wouldn't say the early seasons of Dexter because I think they're still gold, but some of like the kind of mid to later seasons where it's not sort of firing on all cylinders, but it's still producing a very solid story and a very solid season that you're just like very happy to watch because it's like easy TV and it's like nothing too challenging, and you're getting like a real feel for the character again and like who he is and like why you fell in love with the show in the first place. There's a lot of callback to the earlier seasons, so you probably do need to watch Dexter or have an understanding of Dexter to sort of know what's going on because it does reference a lot of people and a lot of stuff from the old season. But it's great. It's great. If you have watched Dexter and you're questioning whether to jump into the new seasons, I would recommend it.
Every summer, I go visit family in Germany, which means I watch a whole bunch of movies about Nazis. So I've got some to recommend this time again. My recommendation this time is Before the Fall, also known as Napola. which is a 2004 historical drama from Germany. So the Napola were kind of Nazi prep schools, where essentially they kind of started out as private schools and then turned into a recruitment pipeline for the Nazi leadership. Especially towards the end of the war, this was where they were kind of training the next generation of leadership of the Nazi movement, right? Which obviously never went anywhere, but that was the goal of the program, and that is what the students of these schools thought they were doing. And so this movie kind of dramatizes these schools, and they follow a 15, 16-year-old boy named Friedrich, who in 1942 is kind of recruited into one of these prep schools, essentially on a boxing scholarship, where he's this boxing prodigy, and he kind of grew up in Nazi Germany, and he went through like all the indoctrination and all of that, but he's not fully bought into the belief system and the ideology. He's just a kid who wants to box, and his opportunity for having a boxing career is to join the boxing team of this elite school that is very prestigious, is very difficult to get into. So he kind of joins the school, and we kind of follow his journey through this program where he becomes indoctrinated into kind of the Nazi ideology, and he makes friends, and some of them are really committed to the cause and others aren't. And it's kind of like a tapestry of kind of fates of these students at these schools. And then various things happen, the kinds of things that students in these schools would have gone through in the later years of the war, essentially. It's kind of using these different characters to kind of depict different angles of what it was like to live in this regime at the time. It's a very smart drama. It's really well written. It's got good characters. It's got a lot of moments that kind of give you a glimpse into what life was like in this kind of society and culture, and does so from different points of view, and it does so in a pretty matter-of-fact way, where it just shows you things and lets you make up your mind about it. So if you want to get kind of a glimpse into what that was like, you could do a lot worse than watching Before the Fall.
No, it sounds very interesting, for sure. Definitely the aspect of seeing, and I think I always have an interest in seeing in these like big cultural events, how did people like react? What was like the stories of some of the more, common folk in those situations that were just trying to get by or just trying to live their lives while everything was unfolding. So I think on that element, it sounds quite interesting, especially with, how the other characters support the story and the way that it's told and the perspectives, etc. So yeah, it definitely sounds of interest.
Yeah, and it also kind of gives you kind of it cuts a little bit deeper than when you watch like an American movie about World War II. The Nazis are just the enemy soldiers, and you don't really see the inner workings of the ideology and how the society worked. And I think that that's interesting by itself. So the best thing I saw this week was The Conference, which is a 1922 German movie, which dramatizes the Wannseekonferenz, which was held in 1942 by high-ranking Nazis in order to plan the Holocaust. And it's a very pivotal event in the Second World War and in European history, but very little is known about it. There's essentially a couple of letters and kind of meeting notes. And they basically took the meeting notes and kind of turned that into a movie script and then shot it in the actual location where that conference was held, which was in this mansion by the side of a lake near Potsdam in Germany. And it's a really riveting movie. It basically plays the attitudes of the time completely straight. It articulates what people believed and why they did the things they did and how they approached this mass killing of millions of people, but in a very kind of reserved and technical and dry way. So I would actually compare it with September 5 in some ways, because it kind of just depicts the time, and it kind of just presents different characters and their perspectives to the viewer and kind of lets them kind of sort it out by themselves and kind of make sense of it by themselves. So there's no big speechifying, there's no dramatic music that tells you who you're supposed to hate. You're just getting a window into like Nazi ideology essentially, and how the German state worked in that time and how they went about planning like an atrocity like this. And there's been movies made about this before, and I've not seen the other ones, but this one is just just like this approach to historical movies, where it just shows you what people did and gives you a window into how they thought. And I think that is almost more important than what actually happened, although you need both, right? But if a movie can kind of get you to understand where these people were at the time, good or bad, right? That is kind of the job of a historical movie, in addition to whatever else is going on in it. And this movie really does that, so that's my recommendation.